Well, in this kind of power vacuum and the kind of the chaos of the time, the Jews in the land, some are very faithful to the Old Testament and the Jewish ways of doing things, but others had gotten quite Hellenized. They become very Greek-like in their thinking and in their behavior. And one fellow by the name of Jason desires to be high priest, but he doesn't have the lineage to do it. So he buys the priesthood from the Greeks, because the Greeks were controlling things at the time, the Seleucids. This is from the book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 4, verses 7 to 8. 2 Maccabees is an apocryphal book, but it is a very good historical book, and a lot of our history from this time period comes from the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So this text says, when Seleucus died and Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, succeeded to the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, obtained the high priesthood by corruption, promising the king an interview 360 talents of silver, and from another source of revenue, 80 talents. So Jason buys the priesthood. So you can see things are getting corrupt in Israel among even the priesthood. Jason struck an alliance with the Romans. Remember, the Romans are coming up. So he's able to side with them, and that kind of puts the Seleucids at bay. 2 Maccabees 4:11 says, who went on the mission to establish friendship and alliance with the Romans. So we see Hellenized Jews like Jason are manipulating the situation to their advantage, and they're using a friendship with Rome against the Seleucids. And Jason is promoting Hellenism. He's been thoroughly entrenched in the Greek way of life. 2 Maccabees 4:11c to 13 says, and he destroyed the lawful ways of living and introduced new customs contrary to the law. He took delight in establishing a gymnasium right under the citadel, and he introduced the noblest of the young men to wear the Greek hat. There was such an extreme of Hellenism, an increase in the adoption of foreign ways, because of the surpassing wickedness of Jason, who was ungodly and no true high priest. So we see that the Jews looked down, the faithful Jews looked down on Jason and his Hellenistic ways. He established a gymnasium. That was particularly offensive to the Jews, because to participate in the sports of the gymnasium, you had to do it without any clothes on. You had to do it naked. And so this was very offensive to the Jews. And then another thing, we don't know a lot of details, but the Greek hat really symbolized the Greek way of life. So if you were to wear the Greek hat, that really meant you were thoroughly Hellenized. And so that was offensive to the Jews. Well, the priests at this time would rather watch wrestling than be involved in their priestly duties. 2 Maccabees 4:14 says that the priests were no longer intent upon their service at the altar, despising the sanctuary and neglecting the sacrifices. They hurried to take part in the unlawful proceedings in the wrestling arena after the signal for the disc throwing. 2 Maccabees 4:14. So we see the priests really were neglecting their duties. They were more concerned about sports and wrestling and disc throwing. So the level of spirituality is really going down in Israel at this time. Many of the Jewish people are starting to get Hellenized. And then this other individual comes on the scene, a new ruler of the Seleucids, and things really turn bad for the Jews at this point. His name is Antiochus IV. He was nicknamed the Crazy One by the Jews. He took the name Epiphanes, which means manifestation of Zeus, but the Jews called him Epimanes, the crazy one. So they did a little play on words to change his title from the manifestation of Zeus to the crazy one. And he did many terrible things to the Jews. It was a great time of persecution. Judaism ended up being outlawed. You couldn't live like a Jew anymore. So it was a very, very difficult time of persecution for the Jewish people. Antiochus IV, one of his main goals in life was to conquer Egypt. His father had attempted to do that previously, but failed. And so Antiochus IV wanted to finish the work that his father had started. So he led a couple of campaigns down to Egypt. Daniel chapter 11, verses 29 and 30, comment on that. At the appointed time, he, that is Antiochus IV, will return and come into the south, Egypt. But this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. And so Antiochus had led a pretty successful campaign to Egypt, and he was ready to conquer the place and declare himself king of Egypt. But then a delegation from Rome came. Now this wasn't an army with soldiers. This was just some delegates from Rome. And they said, here's the message from Rome. You have to stop now. You cannot take over Egypt. And Antiochus was infuriated. He didn't know how to deal with this. And he said, well, let me think about it. And so at that point, the delegate from Rome took out a sword, drew a circle around Antiochus IV in the sand, and said, you think about it before you exit that circle. Now Antiochus IV knew that he couldn't stand up to Rome. Rome was much too powerful. But he had just conquered Egypt and wanted to just relish in that glory that he had finally accomplished his goal in life. And so he was infuriated. So he began the trip back to Syria, back to his homeland. Let's look at Daniel 11, verses 31 and 32. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. So he goes home from Egypt, dejected, angry, and where does he have to pass through? The land of Israel. And a rumor had circulated that Antiochus had died, and so they're celebrating, and Antiochus sends delegates ahead with a promise of peace, but he comes in on the Sabbath and slaughters many, many of the Jews, because they had a belief at that time that they were not to fight on the Sabbath. They believed that God would protect them, and so they would not engage in warfare on the Sabbath. And so Antiochus just wiped out. It was a massacre. Many, many of the Jews died. And so after that terrible massacre, Hellenism began to be forced upon the Jews. Antiochus just kind of took out his rage and his anger on the Jewish people and blamed them for all his problems. We've seen that anti-Semitic trend in the scriptures way back from Pharaoh, who tried to kill the infants in Egypt, tried to kill Moses and the other infants. We see that Haman tried to execute all the Jews, and that anti-Semitic theme, as Satan hates the Jewish people, God's chosen people, and wants to destroy them, rise up again here through the man Antiochus IV. And so Antiochus basically outlawed Judaism. Men were prohibited to get circumcised. The scriptures were outlawed. If you were caught with the Old Testament, it was the death sentence. Just basically, the Jews could not live like Jews any longer. The temple was desecrated by Antiochus IV. He sacrificed a pig on the altar, and then he dedicated the temple to Zeus, a Greek god. And so this was just anathema to the Jews. They referred to it as the abomination of desolation. And so things got so bad for the Jews under the reign of Antiochus IV. So the Jewish religion was outlawed. They could no longer live like Jews. So this created a lot of frustration among the faithful Jews. And eventually they would end up revolting against the Greeks. And we'll look at that in our next class. Let's take a look at the Samaritans. During this time, when Antiochus was persecuting the Jews, he wanted to know, hey, are you Samaritans Jewish? And they said, no, we're not like those people. In fact, we're from Sidon, way up in Phoenicia. So they totally denied their Jewish ancestry, sided with the Phoenicians because they didn't want to have anything to do with the Jewish people. And so this just created an even deeper rift between the Jews and the Samaritans, which had been going on for a couple hundred years already since the time of the Assyrians. But this was just another nail in the coffin, so to speak, to make that rift even wider between the Jews and the Samaritans, as they denied any connection with the Jewish people, so that Antiochus would spare them some of the persecution that was being forced upon the Jews at this time period.